Buenos días. Good morning. We are going to start the session on reproduction. We are going to start with a keynote lecture and then the free presentations. We will try to keep the time always. So I will introduce you to Roberto Sartori. He's going to speak and give the talk, Reproductive Management Strategies to Place High-Producing Dairy Cows in High-Fertility Cycle. Dr. Sartori received his veterinary degree and master's from the School of Veterinary Medicine in Sao Paulo State University. His PhD degree in dairy sciences was from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the area of reproductive physiology of dairy cattle. Dr. Sartori is an associate professor at the Department of Animal Science of the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. His main research interests are in physiology of reproduction in Bos taurus and Bos indicus, the influence of nutrition on reproduction, reproductive biotechnologies, and reproductive efficiency in beef and dairy cattle. He has published more than 150 peer-reviewed papers with more than 4,000 citations and an age index of 31. Dr. Sartori, welcome. You want to use this one?
I have it. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Zarco. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation, and Virbach, my sponsor. So I'm really happy to be here, first time in Cancun, not the first time in Mexico. I've been here several times. I love this country. And I wish you enjoy this talk. So first of all, we have here a QR code that you can scan with your cell phone, and then you have access to all the presentation here. So take your time and check if it's working. So you don't need to worry about taking pictures of the slides. You have all the presentations for you. Did it work? And for the ones that missed that, I'll have the same QR code at the end of the presentation. So feel free to enjoy that. So I'd like also to thank my co-author here, Carlos Consentini, who has been working a lot with reproduction in dairy cows. It's a long story. We started working with dairy cows in 1997 when I went to Wisconsin. And at that time, fertility was really low, reproduction efficiency was really bad. And we started to trying to understand the physiology of the high-producing dairy cows. I'm going to share with you some of the data we published during my PhD studies, trying to figure out what was going on with the high-producing dairy cow. And along the years, we developed strategies to improve the efficiency of this very challenging animal. So I'm going to start with a short introduction and mention this reproductive physiology of the high-producing dairy cow. Introduce to you the high-fertility cycle if you haven't seen it yet. Use some reproductive index for us to be talking the same language. And then talk about the recent programs that have been developed in dairy cows to optimize reproductive efficiency. And then end with some final considerations. So just going back one more time to the first slide for you, the ones that missed the QR code. Okay. So the question we have to ask is, do high-producing cows really have poor fertility? Or is it a matter of bad repro management, not being able to manage the cows the way we should? And when we talk about reproduction in dairy cows, we must talk about everything. So genetics, nutrition, infrastructure, because heat stress is a big problem, management, and then we must have not only a good reproductive management, which I'm going to talk about this today, but also to have a holistic vision about the entire system. So we need to work about with cow comfort, environment, having better housing for the cows to alleviate heat stress. But one of the things we are going to talk a lot here is the transition period of the cows. So how nutrition interferes in that, but more than that, how reproduction can interfere in the transition period. The dry period is a very important period for the cow that will impact the future reproductive efficiency of that animal. And of course, if they have problems here, they are going to have increased case of clinical disease, postpartum disease, metabolic disorders. So if we do a good job, we can have a high 21-day pregnancy rate, low Kelvin interval, and improve milk production of the cows. So we have more cows in the high fertility cycle. And to do that, we propose to have what we call systematized reproductive management using time they are for first service. And in fact, we use what we call fertility protocols for the first service. And then re-inseminate the ones that did not become pregnant at first service as soon as possible using estrus detection. The ones that are not caught in heat, not inseminated, go to an early pregnancy diagnosis and are resynchronized in a very routine way. So we want to do this, and if cows don't get pregnant, we intensify the use of fertility protocols for AI in resynchronization programs. So talking about the physiology of the high-producing cow, the thing we've been talking about for more than 25 years is the high liver metabolism of steroid hormones. So cows that produce a lot of milk, they have very accelerated liver blood flow, because cows that eat a lot, they have a very big blood flow through the gut. And if we compare a lactating cow to a dry cow, here's the energy per day that they consume. Because of the high blood flow from the intestines and the rumen going through the liver, lactating cows have a much higher blood flow. The liver is the organ that metabolizes the steroid hormones, therefore they have lower circulating estradiol and progesterone. And that impacts fertility. Anyway, just for you to have an idea, these are data that we have using high fertility programs such as double OVSync or double eSync, the program we developed in our school, in which OVSync uses the GenerAge as an ovulation inducer, and the one that we use in Brazil uses estradiol cypionate as ovulation inducer. And if you look in the right side here, the probability of expression of the estrus at the end of the protocol, if you treat cows with estradiol cypionate, there is no influence of milk production on estrus behavior. However, if you induce ovulation with GenerAge, the greater the milk production, the lower the probability of cows to show estrus at the end of the protocol. And then we know that even when you use time-day protocols, cows that show estrus, they are more fertile and they lose less pregnancy. So you want cows in heat. Here is a model that we put together a long time ago, comparing high-producing cow to a low-producing or a dry cow. So when you have animal with lower feed intake, like a dry cow or heifer, they have higher circulating progesterone after luteolysis. The pre-ovulatory follicle is growing, secreting estradiol, and then with the lack of progesterone, there is an increase in LH pulse frequency, and then you have a follicle growing, there is a peak of estradiol, and then a peak of LH and the cow ovulates. When you see a high-producing cow with a greater dry matter intake, there is already lower circulating progesterone here. The follicle is growing, secreting estradiol, but because of the metabolism, there is lower estradiol in the circulation. Therefore, the follicle must grow bigger for a long period of time until it reaches enough estradiol to induce an LH surge and ovulate. Therefore, a high-producing cow had a shorter estrus duration because the estradiol peak is lower than in a low-producing cow. There is a delayed LH surge. They ovulate a bigger follicle, and probably they have an overstimulated oocyte. And because of this persistent follicle, this oocyte is compromised. And you can see in this study here, in which we had cows that ovulated a young follicle or a persistent and bigger follicle here. And when a follicle is persistent, fertility is very low. So young follicle, even it's smaller, it produces a much better fertility than a persistent follicle. So we try to manage reproduction to avoid as much as we can ovulation of this kind of follicle. And also, because lactating cows, high-producing cows ovulate bigger follicles, they also have bigger corporal lutea. However, despite that, they have lower circulating progesterone because of the liver metabolism that is very accelerated. And we know that progesterone impacts embryo development. And as an example on how cows metabolize faster progesterone, look at here. Cows with high milk production, 40 kilos per day, compared to dry cows. The same progesterone implant in cows that didn't have ACL. So this is an implant with 2 grams of progesterone. And you see the progesterone profile in circulation. So it's 38% lower in a lactating cows with this implant. So first of all, it metabolizes faster, has low progesterone on circulation. And if you think about what you need for progesterone to have a healthy embryo, we're talking about 5, 6 nanograms per ml. So that's what a healthy CL produces. So if you want to replace a CL with a progesterone implant, you probably have to put 5 implants in the cow. So that's why we now talk about pre-synchronizing cows to have a nice CL during the time they are protocol. That's what we're going to be showing you later on. So here is some data from Pat Lonergan's group showing the impact of progesterone on embryo development. So, for example, in this first study, they had super ovulated or not recipients. They transferred the embryos on day 7 and recovered on day 13 and measured the embryos. So the higher the progesterone, the bigger is the embryo. I'm not saying that you need like 35 nanograms per ml of progesterone to have a healthy embryo. Probably this embryo is too big to be good. But anyway, there is a direct relationship between progesterone and embryo development. The same here in this study. So they had embryos. In fact, they inseminated these animals here. They were heifers, and they supplemented them or not with progesterone and flushed the embryos on day 13 or 16. And the heifers that were supplemented with progesterone had bigger embryos. Another thing that's really important is one of the things that increases pregnancy loss is twinning. And so we must avoid double ovulations. And when a cow ovulates naturally, the greater the milk production the cow has, the greater is the probability of double ovulation and twin pregnancies. Therefore, you double the probability of abortions. So if you look at this study we did some time ago, look at the relationship between milk production and circulating progesterone and probability of a cow to have a single dominant follicle in the first wave, double dominance, or triple dominant follicles. So cows with higher milk production, they have the lowest circulating progesterone, and they are the ones who have triple dominance. The ones intermediate are the codominant cows, and the ones with lower milk production, they have the highest circulating progesterone, and they are the ones that have single dominant follicles. And if we look at here, even using the high fertility protocols that I'm going to talk about later, in which we lower a lot double ovulation, we lower to 7% for high-producing cows is pretty good. Even though, if we look at the relationship between milk yield and probability of multiple ovulation, as milk yield increases, cows have the greater chance to have double ovulation, even using those protocols. So going back to my studies and during my PhD, we looked at the influence of feed intake on embryo quality. So what we did, we let cows and heifers to come in estrus spontaneously, bred with a high fertility semen here, confirmed ovulation with ultrasound, and 5 days after ovulation, we flushed embryos. They were not super ovulated. This study was during summer. So cows producing 46 kilos of milk per day versus heifers, cycling heifers, 12 to 16 months old. So we flushed the embryos, we resynchronized them, and did that 2 or 3 times in each animal. And it was summer, very hot summer. And if you see here, this is the magical number, 39.1 body temperature. Above that, oocyte quality is compromised. And if you look at the lactating cows, as ambient temperature increase, body temperature increase linearly. Whereas heifers, they do a pretty good job maintaining low body temperature. So we did the same study during winter, and instead of using heifers, we used non-lactating cows. And the funny thing is, those cows were cooled because they did not get pregnant during lactation. So they were bred like 6, 7, 8 times, did not conceive, so they were cooled and they're used in this study. And when we look at the results, during summer, even during hot weather, heifers had 100% fertilization rate. All structures that we flushed were embryos. Whereas the cows, only 55% of the structures were at least cleaved. And we checked the unfertilized oocytes, and more than 80% of them had excess RCL in the zona pellucida, which means the sperm was there, but the egg was cooked. So that's why during summer, under heat stress, the oocyte is already bad. So it doesn't matter if you breed in the morning or in the afternoon. It's not going to make any difference. But during winter time, the same semen, everything was the same. Look at the fertilization rate. High-producing cows or dry cows, pretty good fertilization rate. So the problem is here. And then we looked at the embryo quality. And even during summer, 72% of the embryos from heifers were pretty good. 74% of the embryos of those dry cows that were repeat breeders were very good. But during summer, only 18% of the structures we flushed were considered viable. And even during winter, only 46% of the structures were not degenerated or unfertilized. So this is probably related to the high feed intake of the cows and the endocrine environment that they have with low estradiol, low progesterone. And then we talk about the high fertility cycle here. First, I'd like to share with you one thing that's important. That's why we insist on doing timed AI for first breeding postpartum, because we have a lot of cows that are not cycling by the time they should be bred. So if you keep waiting for those cows to come in heat, you should grab a chair, because they are gonna take a long time to come in heat. And it matters if the cows had any kind of disease or not postpartum. So in this study, we had cows with history of disease from calving to 50 days in milk. So either retained placenta, metritis, ketosis, mastitis, respiratory problem, digestive problem, or lameness. And if you look at here, we had cows that did not have any history of disease, one or more than one. And this is a pretty good farm. And still, more than 60% of the cows had at least one disease. And if they have a problem, you have more than 30% of them, between 30 and 40%, not cycling by 50 days in milk. So the ones that we want are the ones here, and still 18% of them are in an estrus by 50 days in milk. This is a nice piece of data also that Pedro Monteiro collected. The relationship between the dry period length and the probability of cows to develop an ovulatory condition. So the longer the dry period, the greater is the probability of the cow to not be cycling by 50 days in milk. Probably because when the dry period is long, the cows get fat, and that's a problem. You don't want fat cows calving, different than beef cattle, completely different. You want very thin cows during the transition period. So if we look at another piece of data we have here, about 800 cows submitted to fertility programs. So this is high-producing cows. If they are healthy, 52% pregnancy per AI, which is pretty good for 40 kilos per day of milk of a cow. But if they had a story of one disease, it drops to 43%. Two or more disease drops to 28%. So if you look at individual, each disease here, the impact, if they had or not a disease, or if they were healthy or not, there is a big difference in fertility, either in primiparous or multiparous cows. This study was pretty interesting. Rafael Barletta did in Brazil. So during the transition period, they separated cows that lost, maintained, or gained body condition score during the transition period, which means between 20 days before and 20 days after calving. And if you see, there are cows that gain body condition score during this period. They are not the majority, but they exist. And they are the cows that we are looking for. Because those cows, and they calve pretty thin, here is 2.6 body condition score, but they gain body condition. They must be thin, but not sick, okay? So those are the animals that ovulate earlier in the postpartum. If you look here, 100% of them had already ovulated by 50 days in milk, and they had less diseases. If they lose body condition score, they are in trouble, and those are the majority of the cows. Look at the fertility. There are two studies in the same way, looking at cows that lost, maintained, or gained body condition. This is the pregnancy per AI of the first postpartum AI, and by timed insemination. If they lost body condition, fertility is really low. If they maintain it, it's not that good. But if they gained body condition, fertility is really high. I don't even like to show this data from the US, from two farmers in the US, because it's hard to believe. When they gained body condition, fertility was 84% pregnancy per AI. And we're talking about more than 400 cows in this group here. So in fact, cows with body condition score gaining in transition period have excellent pregnancy per AI. And here's the Richard Pursley, who put together this paper talking about the high fertility cycle. And they evaluated on a farm with 1,000 cows and looked at the duration of the interwave calving interval previously to the second lactation of the cows in relationship to other variables. So, for example, the relationship between the previous calving interval and body condition score at parturition, you see this line here is what we call the ideal intercalving interval of 13 months. So the shorter the calving interval, the lower is the body condition at calving. So that's what you aim to. Cows calving, which nutritionists don't like when you talk about that, but we are looking at cows that calve at 2.6, 2.7 body condition and scale from 1 to 5. So the longer the calving interval, the greater is the body condition at calving. The relationship between previous calving interval and body condition score change postpartum. So if we look here, again, 13-month calving interval. So the shorter the calving interval, the lower is the body condition score, or even cows gaining body condition score here. Also, relationship between body condition score change and probability of cows to become sick postpartum. So, if cows lose more body condition, they have a greater probability of become sick, have health problem. If they don't lose or gain body condition during the transition period, very low incidence of disease. So this is what we call the high fertility cycle. We want cows to become pregnant by 130 days in milk. Do whatever you can to get those cows pregnant early. With that, they're gonna calve with a low body condition, but healthy. Therefore, they are gonna lose, low body condition, less body condition, or they are gonna gain body condition. That's what we would like to. With that, we have fewer health issues, they have a greater pregnancy period, and also, I didn't show you data, but there is, they have a reduced early pregnancy loss. Therefore, you put your herd in the high fertility cycle by doing that. So that's probably the take-home message here is, get your cows pregnant by 130 days in milk. Then this is gonna happen naturally. So just for us to talk the same language here, the reproductive index that we use a lot in reproduction is cervix rate, pregnancy per AI, and pregnancy rate, 21-day pregnancy rate. For example, you have 100 eligible cows here during 21 days, you inseminated 45, and 15 became pregnant. So what we have here is 50% of cervix rate, 30% of pregnancy per AI because we bred 45 and 15 became pregnant, and therefore our pregnancy per AI is 15%. So out of 100 cows, we only can get 15 pregnant in a 21-day period. And the bad thing is, this is the average number probably everywhere we go, if not lower than that. It's very common to have 12, 13% 21-day pregnancy rate. In Wisconsin in 97, we were talking about that. 13% at the University of Wisconsin herd, 13% 21-day pregnancy rate. This is the average for Brazilian herds in high-producing cows. So let's talk about recent programs in dairy cows. So what we aim to is aggressively inseminate cows at the end of the voluntary waiting period, use fertility programs for that, which have a better hormonal environment and have better oocytes and better embryos to improve fertility and good synchronization rates. We also wanted to re-inseminate cows, non-pregnant cows, as soon as possible by estrus detection or resynchronization. And here are some ideas of which is the best time-of-the-year program to optimize fertility in high-producing cows. So what we want is, first of all, if possible, at the beginning of the protocol, cow to already have a ACL and a dominant follicle that would ovulate to a generate treatment on day 0. With that, we can have high circulating progesterone during the protocol, which is really important for oocyte quality and lower double ovulation. So you want high progesterone during this period. You have a very well synchronized emergence of the next follicular wave. At the end of the protocol, you expect, if possible, to have 2 CL here at the time of PGF. One from the pre-synchronization and another one from the generate treatment. And you want to have no progesterone at the time of AI. So we use 2 prostaglandin treatments to guarantee that the CL will regress properly. We also want a high estradiol at the time of AI, so we have some data that when we use cypionate, estradiol cypionate, you have more estrus behavior and lower pregnancy loss. So it's pretty interesting. That's why we should be able to use estradiol everywhere in the world. And then have a good ovulatory follicle to have a good CL and have proper progesterone after AI. With that, you have a good oocytes, high fertilization, lower double ovulation, and a good uterine environment. So with that, you improve fertility. For example, in this study, we had fertility of cows that did not ovulate on day 0 to generate or ovulated. So you see when they ovulate, they have better fertility. If they didn't have ACL on day 0 of the protocol and did not ovulate to generate, fertility is really low. If they start the protocol with ACL and don't respond to generate, it's okay. But if they respond and have 2 CL, that's the cow with the best fertility. Look at here the importance of having no progesterone at the time of AI. So in this study, at the time of AI, you collect blood and measure progesterone. And we're talking about very little progesterone here, between 0.1 and 0.22 nanograms per ml versus nothing. And the cows that had a little bit of progesterone, they ovulated less, and fertility was much lower compared to cows that didn't have any progesterone at the time of AI. Then when we removed the cows that did not ovulate and still checked for fertility, the cows that had some residual progesterone still had very low fertility. So that's why we stimulate technicians and producers to use 2 prostaglandin treatments at the end of the protocol. We don't want any progesterone. So residual progesterone near time of AI really decreases ovulation incidence and lowers pregnancy per AI. And the fertility programs here there are several. I have here 3 examples. The double off sync is the one that was developed in Wisconsin some time ago. It's we used a lot in several places, and it really made a big difference. And it consists of using an off sync protocol. You don't inseminate after the first one, and it uses only to pre-synchronize cows for them to have ACL and an ovulatory follicle at the time of this generate treatment. Therefore, at the time of this PGF, those cows have 2 CL. That's the ideal situation. And there is this developed by Richard Pursley, the G6G, with the same idea. It's a little bit simpler. And this is the one we developed in our school in Brazil, using a progesterone implant, estradiol cypionate, and prostaglandin for pre-synchronization. 8 to 10 days later, we start with our protocol, also using progesterone implant, and especially using estradiol cypionate to induce ovulation. So those programs, they really improve fertility for the first cervix. It's normal to have above 50% pregnancy per AI when you use those programs. So for you to have an idea how these programs work, there's a very beautiful study done in Wisconsin in which they test the double of sync protocol, so generate, prostaglandin, generate, and then another of sync here. And then what they did was to show the importance of progesterone during the protocol, and not necessarily the age of the follicle or the oocyte. So here you have an environment with high progesterone during the development of the pre-ovulatory follicle. So for example, at this time, at the time of this prostaglandin, the cow should have 2 cl. In the other group, they did exactly the same. However, they treated with PGF after this generating injection. So they have lower progesterone. At this time here, they would have just a young cl. So in both groups, the age of the follicle is the same. The difference is, in one group, the pre-ovulatory follicle is growing under a high progesterone environment because there are 2 cl, one 7 and another one 14 days old. And the other group, the pre-ovulatory follicle grew under low progesterone, just a young cl. And then those cows were flushed 7 days after AI, and fertilization was the same, but look at the quality of the embryos, grade 1 and 2 embryos, or in other words, good embryos. So a high-producing dairy cow, which in my study had only 43% of viable embryos, even during winter time. Here, when you put in this kind of protocol, you have 87% of the structures collected being of high quality. The fertilized structures, obviously. Only 8% degenerate, whereas in the low circulating progesterone, it's still better than 43, but it's only 61% of viable embryos. You have 35% degenerate. That's why we can have improved fertility and good quality oocyte in high-producing cows if we put them in a good progesterone environment during the development of the pre-ovulatory follicle. Just to have an idea, this study was done in Portugal by Paul Frick's group. And so they did the double of sync here, even with 2 PGF treatments at the end, because now we know that it helps, compared to estrus detection. So they synchronized the estrus and bred cows in estrus. So they had the opportunity to be bred at the same time postpartum. So it's a fair comparison. Half of them here, half of them here. Group double of sync, group estrus. So if you look at the numbers here, of course, when you do double of sync, the cervix rate is 100% because you breed every single cow. When they bred 2S, they were bred 2S, 22.5% of cows were not caught in heat, so they were not inseminated. So it's 29% less cows bred here. The fertility, like we say, this is a fertility program. So the pregnancy period was greater in double of sync compared to estrus. Remember, those cows, some of them may be ovulating a persistent follicle here. And therefore, the pregnancy rate, in other words, the pregnant cows on day 33, after the first opportunity to be bred, is 49% versus 30%. So that's why we insist in stimulating people to do timed AI, especially with fertility programs for the first postpartum AI. Here is, I told you in 97, 21-day pregnancy rate in the University of Wisconsin was 13%. I came back in 2015, and I look at the numbers again. Now they do double of sync there for the first AI, and they do a resynchronization here earlier. They started resync on day 25. On day 32, when they do the pre-check. If they have ACL, they finish the protocol. If they don't have ACL, open cows, of course, the open cows that have ACL, they finish the off-sync. If they don't have ACL, They treat with Generate, put a progesterone implant, and then finish the protocol. So that's the routine they do there. They don't breed cows in estrus at all at the University of Wisconsin. And if you look here, this is the voluntary waiting period is 76 days. They don't breed any cow before that. So this in red is the first AI postpartum, in blue is the second, in green is the third. Within 100 days period, they breed. The cows have 3 opportunities to be bred. And look at the numbers here. We're talking about 600 milking cows. They are milked twice a day. Average milk production is 45 kilos per day. And they have more than 80% of cows pregnant by 176 days in milk. No estrogen detection, and that's the repro management they have. Cervix rate is 66%. Pregnancy per AI average is 47%. For you to have an idea, premiparous cows for the first insemination using double off sync, pregnancy per AI is 65%. And then, instead of 13%, which we had a long time ago, now it's 31%, 21-day pregnancy rate. Here are some, this is a study by Carlos Constantini that we compared the double off sync to our double e-sync program in a herd in Brazil. And first to prove that double off sync works, and that works in Brazil, and double e-sync should be comparable to double off sync. One thing that's important to mention, at this time we give a double dose of Generate, and we also use 2 shots of PGF here. Let's look at the results here. First, postpartum pregnancy per AI, double off sync 48%, double e-sync 52.5%, no difference. At 60 days, dropped a little bit because of a little bit high pregnancy loss here. So those had pretty good results and very comparable. And we developed a program here that's kind of a cake recipe. You just do that, it's gonna be fine. So our double e-sync program for the first AI, if we have like a voluntary waiting period of 60 days, we start on average 33 days in milk. Every week we start a new group of cows. So you can look at this carefully later. So 10 days after removing the implant here and treating with estradiol, cypionate, and PGF, 10 days later we start the protocol. We do the first AI, then after that we check for estrus. If they come in here, they are bred. If not, they go to pregnancy diagnosis 32 days after the last AI. If they are open, we start the protocol again, and so forth and so on. And this works pretty well. If we remember the numbers we showed you before, we are talking about 15% 21-day pregnancy rate. By using this program that I just mentioned, the top farms, we're talking about 70% service rate, 40% average pregnancy per AI, with a 28% 21-day pregnancy rate, which is comparable to the best numbers you see in the best farms in US, for example. So as final considerations here, this is a figure put together in this publication here. I'm not going to go through that because of time, but the idea is to manage cows, manage reproduction in the cows with the goal to have a 21-day pregnancy rate above 25%, aiming for a pregnancy per AI at first service above 50% and later service above 40%. So you have more than 80% of your cows pregnant by 150 days in milk. And there's some considerations about the body condition score and what happens to them when they enter in the dry periods, and other factors that influence reproduction. You can look at this carefully in this publication. If you want to scan this QR code, you have access to this paper. Also, in the proceedings of this meeting, we have a lot of data related to that. So finally, I would like to reinforce the invitation that Guilherme made in his talk, Guilherme Pugliese. Join us at our SBT meeting, the Embryo Technology Society meeting in Brazil, and between 21 and 23 of August in São Paulo. The SBT meeting is a pretty fun meeting and a very technical meeting as well. With that, if you want to scan this QR code again, this is the entire presentation that you can have access to. All the slides are here, so feel free to scan that QR code. I thank all the collaborators, all the funding agencies, the companies, the farms, and again, thank you very much for sponsoring my trip to Cancun. And with that, I end my presentation, and thank you again, and if we have some time, I can answer some questions.
Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Who wants to ask something? No questions?
Yes, just to explain why we do double dose of generate, because now we know that if a cow has a CL, progesterone prevents generate to induce a nice LH peak. So cows don't ovulate if there is progesterone, even if they have a nice follicle. When you double the dose of generate, you increase the chance of cow to ovulate. In fact, you double ovulation when you treat cows with double dose of generate. That's why we are using that in the first time on day 0 of the ovulating protocol. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Sartori. There is a question?
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Roberto. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very good to see the latest about synchronization protocols, especially in the US and Brazil, which I think they are leading the research in the worldwide in that topic. But I have a question more about estrus detection AI, because in the UK we have restrictions for using hormonal treatments as blanket treatments in dairy herds. So we see mainly combination of heat detection and synchronization protocols, usually off sync after a certain period of time. So my question is, what would you recommend us to improve our fertility in these kind of conditions that we cannot use estradiol or hormonal treatments as a blanket treatment, if we can say it like that?
Yeah, that's tricky, because as we see, the physiology of the cow is a problem. So every data we see in Brazil now, in cows that produce above 30 kilos of milk per day, fertility of cows breeding by estrus is lower than when you do timed AI. It's always lower. So the way to fix the problem of that high-producing cow is using timed AI, especially fertility programs. So by inseminating in estrus, you are never going to be able to reach high reproductive efficiency. That's the thing. And so probably you have to lower milk production of your cows to have better fertility. And we have, in Brazil, we have those Girolando cows that produce 15, 20 kilos. New Zealand, they have those cows in grazing system. In Ireland, they have pretty good fertility bred in estrus. But when you talk about a cow that's producing 40, 50, 60 kilos of milk per day, if you breed in estrus, you are in trouble. At least, and for example, when we do the breeding after the first AI, timed AI, and we check for estrus and we breed, we do that because we improve service rate. But we know that we are probably lowering pregnancy per AI by breeding in estrus instead of resynchronizing that cow and breeding by timed AI. You know? But because we improve service rate, we still have good reproductive efficiency. So that's what probably you have to do. You know, if you are breeding by estrus, use the best tools you have to get cows in estrus again, the ones that don't get pregnant. So there are several tools now that are pretty good to do that. So although you don't have a very good conception rate, pregnancy per AI, but you must have very good service rate. That's I think the thing you need to try.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sartori.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will continue with the next talk by Dario Antonio Vallejo Timarán. Here. ¿Sabes cómo está este? Para avanzar atrás y el de abajo es para el apuntador. Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's just start. Today I present you clinical and cytological cervix findings and occurrence with postpartum uterine disease in grazing dairy cows from high altitude tropical herds. My name is Dario Vallejo. I am senior researcher at the Colombian Corporation of Agriculture Researcher, AgroSavia. And this is part of working that we developed related with postpartum uterine disease in grazing dairy cows. For this reason, I present you a shorter context about that. About grazing dairy cows from high tropical herds, we have some particular characteristics that is important to consider for that. In general, we have consecutive seasons from rainy seasons and dry seasons. We have grazing production. However, there is no calculation of ration consumption. This is a big trouble for us. And we have high level of no protein nitrogens in the diet, but low energy amounts in the diet in the grass. And in addition, we increase dietary requirements due these problems, genetic improve, milk yield increase, and this increase the problems to proper or to offer energy and another requirements for the cow, altitude, and low oxygen disponibility, head stress. We produce milk to 2,200 until 3,800 meters from sea level in a mountainous areas with undulated topography and high solar radiation. These problems are related with different troubles. For example, we have trouble related with hypoglycemia and hyperketonemia. We have problems related with head stress. Despite in the altitude, the head stress is common because of the radiation. And problems like that. Cows need to walk in long trades from the milking rooms until the padcocks. We can see here the rotational system that we have. And the solution that farmers use to working with these problems, it's offer a high amount of concentrated or balanced diets. And this is a no fractionated diet, offering only 2 times during milking. And these have troubles with a low pH in the rumen. In this context, postpartum disease are common. We found different problems. But today we're talking about postpartum uterine disease because it's common in this kind of cows. We found that conditions of the high tropics and herd management are related with postpartum uterine disease. Specifically, we found that clinical ketosis and subclinical hypocalcemia are related with subclinical troubles related with inadequate endometritis, inadequate immunological response. And we found that problems like dystocia, retained placenta, are related with clinical troubles, okay? And this is a common problem for us. We found clinical troubles related with purulent vaginal discharge and cytological endometritis, without cytological endometritis. And we found the subclinical problems, no purulent vaginal discharge, but with cytological endometritis. However, a group of cows has been reported previously that despite have purulent vaginal discharge, there are no found cytological endometritis. And we started talking about cervicitis and vaginitis as a bigger trouble. The information about cervicitis worldwide is not common. This is some of the research that are related in that topic. We found that the prevalence or the incidence of the disease range between 20 to 38%. Some of these researchers found some relationship with the pregnancy risk, this decrease, or with problems in conception and pregnancy rates. This couple of work, I working with that in Canada, we found more expression of some interleukins in cervicitis cows compared with healthy cows, apparently healthy cows. And we found a prevalence of 31% of cows with a concomitant occurrence with other uterine conditions like endometritis and metritis. This research has been made in different systems, okay, different dairy systems such as North America or Europe, but not in grazing. In grazing, the information is not clear today. And for this reason, we started research to evaluate the clinical and cytological findings in the cervix and how it's related with the occurrence of postpartum uterine disease problems. So, for that, we designed a sample, we designed a study, a cross-sectional study, a longitudinal study, in 71 Holstein cows from 3 commercial herds in Antioquia, Colombia. Each cow was examined in this kind of time, between calving until 60 days in milk, and the 3 days, 45 days, and 60 days, we performing a reproductive exam and cytological sampling for varying uterine diagnosis, palpation, ultrasound, vaginoscopy, video endoscopy of the cervix, and performing endometrial cytology for the diagnosis of subclinical endometritis and subclinical cervicitis. Between 60 to 90 days in milk, we performing a time-fixed artificial insemination with a simple protocol and a follow-up to pregnancy after that. This is the case definition. We use Hartman definition to define clinical cervicitis, in which grade 0, grade 1, and grade 2. Grade 0 is uncongested cervical mucosa, grade 1 congested cervical mucosa, and grade 2 congested cervical mucosa with prolapse of second cervical ring. We define grade 2 as a cervicitis cause, clinical cervicitis cause. And at cytological exam, we're performing a count of neutrophil, and we're defining a percentage major than 5% to define subclinical cervicitis and subclinical endometritis. This is the study variables, and we analyze the data with descriptive statistics and incidence risk. Okay. Association between cervicitis and postpartum uterine disease was evaluated with no parameter disease, and we use logistic regression models to define some relationship between calving on management of the hair characteristics and the occurrence of the disease. Okay, about the results. We found these calving characteristics. This is the parity of the cows. Body condition score at calving. The proportion of subclinical hypocalcemia were more than 50%. Dystocia and retaining placenta was similar to other studies that we performed. It's in a range similar between 70 to 23. And about uterine involution, we found delayed uterine involution between 30 to 60 days in milk. About 40% of the cows have delayed uterine involution plus purulent vaginal discharge. And some of these cows, 7%, only have delayed uterine involution. And this is the findings general of the study. We found clinical endometritis at 60 days in milk in 31% of the cows, and clinical cervicitis in 36% of the cows. Cytological endometritis was found in 34% of the cows, and cytological cervicitis in 31% of the cows. These results are similar. Previous reports in grazing dairy cattle in Colombia. This is a study that I performed during my PhD. We found an incidence risk of 20%, 29%, and 26% of cows with subclinical, clinical and subclinical endometritis respectively. And it's similar founds, and no previous reports has been found from cervicitis in Colombia. However, our findings is similar range previously reported between 26 to 31% of the cows with cervicitis. We're performing a variable analysis. You can see here the occurrence of uterine disease, different uterine disease, and its relation with clinical cervicitis. Interesting here, we found a relationship between the occurrence of clinical endometritis and clinical cervicitis at 21 days in milk with the occurrence of clinical cervicitis of 35 days in milk, and cows with clinical endometritis, we found relationship with clinical cervicitis at 35 days in milk. This is the model to logistic regression. We use a directed acyclic graph to find the causal network effects related with the disease. However, we don't find a relationship between calving problems, so calving management of the herd characteristics and cervicitis specifically. We don't find relationship with subclinical hypocalcemia or parity or body condition score. And we need to start to research more deeply to know what kind of factors are related with the occurrence of cervicitis, because our hypothesis had probably the same problem related with clinical disorders as endometritis or metritis. We think that the same risk factors are related with that, but we don't find relationship. We need to know what kind of characteristics could be related with cervicitis. Probably calving problems or inflammatory problems. And this is the proportion of cows that have anovulations, type 1, 2, type 3, and type 4. We found a high proportion of anovulations, at 60 days in milk. In type 1, it's more common in grazing dairy cows, but we found of 66% of the cows were diagnosed with anovulation type 1 at 60 days in milk. 60% of these cows had clinical endometritis at this time, and we found significant association between the diagnosis of grade 2 cervix on 45 days postpartum with the subsequent development of clinical endometritis at 60 days postpartum. So for now, our findings are related with that. Clinical cervicitis and cytological cervicitis occurring in 46 and 52% of the cows. And clinical cervicitis was associated with the occurrence of clinical endometritis, which affect fertility of the cows evaluated, increase the risk of anovulation and anestrus. So we don't find a directly relationship, different than other studies. We found an indirect relationship. But fornix and cervical status can be a good indicator for postpartum uterine disease. It is recommended to evaluate whether visual vaginal examination at 30 and 40 days postpartum can predict the subsequent occurrence of clinical endometritis. This is similar to another study found in Canada, and probably vaginal examination could be a good predictor. In the same way, it is recommended to evaluate whether the therapeutic management of clinical cervicitis can reduce the subsequent occurrence of clinical endometritis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Vallejo. We have time for some questions. Is there any question? No questions?
¿Ha investigado bacterias asociadas a esa presentación de los casos? Lactospira, coli.
Okay. There's no problem. The question is if we research about some bacteria related with this disease. Yes, indirectly. In postpartum uterine disease, it's important to note that it's probably to find the same bacteria in healthy and disease cause. This is the big finding. Probably more variability of bacteria is related with less probability of disease. However, in the Canada study, we found a relationship between Trueperella pyogenes and the occurrence of cervicitis. Trueperella pyogenes is probably now the one of the unique bacteria that we can find in a sick cow in comparison with a healthy cow, Trueperella pyogenes. And some research we're performing with Mycoplasma too, but we don't have a relationship directly between this bacteria and cervicity occurrence. But yes, Trueperella pyogenes was one of them.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vallejo. Now we will continue with Dr. Karen Wagener. You can use this or you can use that one. You already know how to use this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarko, for the kind introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my talk. It's a pleasure for me to speak here today about heat stress here at the conference in Cancun, where I'm sure that everyone more or less is affected by heat stress. Although I also think that some of you are more adapted than people coming from colder regions than me. Yeah, heat stress is becoming a global problem, so it's not only a problem in tropical or subtropical conditions, which is shown here on this Earth map. And here we see the temperature deviations from averages recorded between 1950 and 1980. And it becomes clear that our planet is undergoing significant climatic changes, which is not a surprise anymore. So coming now to the cows, how can we assess heat stress in cows? So the temperature humidity index is widely accepted as there is a formula to calculate the heat stress exposure of the dairy cows, and this involves both the temperature and the relative humidity. And here you see on this slide the respective THI values when we put different relative humidity values or temperature values into this formula. And a threshold of 68 is widely accepted as comfort threshold. And increased THI values are related to negative consequences or lead to negative consequences, such as decreased milk yield, decreased fertility, or decreased dry matter intake. And it also leads to severe discomfort of the animals. Here I made my own one animal trial in our barn in Austria, and just to give you a short expression about our climatic conditions in Austria, I've chosen a very warm day in August, and there we had a relative humidity of 80% and temperature of 24 degrees, which resulted in a THI of 73. And this cow was significantly affected by heat stress. She was lying down on the bare ground and did not use anymore the cubicles and was also pumping very hard. So in our study, we were now interested in the postpartum period because, as we all know, the postpartum period is a very critical phase during the lactation cycle of the cow, as the cow is exposed to the negative energy balance due to the decreased dry matter intake after calving and the onset of lactation. And at the same time, the animal is also challenged, or the immune system of the animals is challenged by the uterine clearance after calving. And heat stress further exacerbates these problems as heat stress decreases dry matter intake and both the decreased diameter intake and the heat stress itself decreases the immune response of the cow, and this makes the cows susceptible for postpartum diseases. And as most studies on this topic have been performed in subtropical or tropical conditions, we wanted now in our study to see, to analyze the effect of heat stress under Central European conditions on the occurrence of periparturient diseases. For the study, we used data, so it is a retrospective data analysis, but we used the data of a prospective, bigger study where 5 doctoral students were on, for 2 years on a dairy farm in Slovakia, and they monitored very closely the animals. And in our study, we included 1,824 5 Holstein Friesian cows. And here's the study design we used. I will shortly go into the details. No. So we included the cows at the day of calving, and we scored the body condition of the animals. Then at day 5 postpartum, we examined the animals for signs of puerperal metritis and subclinical ketosis. And on day 31, we diagnosed the diseases of clinical endometritis and subclinical endometritis, Dario was already mentioning. And we also assessed the body condition score for a second time. And of course, during the whole study period, we assessed the climate conditions in the barn. And here, I go now more into details of our examinations. So the body condition scoring was done on a 5-point scale according to Edmondson et al. And between the day of calving and day 31, we calculated then the body condition score loss. On day 5 after calving, we took blood samples for the diagnosis of subclinical ketosis, which was defined as a BHB value equal or above 1.2 millimole per liters. Then on day 5, the animals underwent also gynecological examination to diagnose puerperal metritis, which was defined as systemic illness, including fever, and which is temperature above 39.5 degrees Celsius, and an enlarged uterus and fetid watery red-brown vaginal discharge. Then on day 31, we did another gynecological examination, and here we diagnosed clinical endometritis, which was defined as mucopurulent vaginal discharge. From animals without purulent vaginal discharge, we took a cytobrush sample to determine the proportion of polymorphonuclear neutrophils. And here we also, similar to Dario, we used a threshold of 5% for the diagnosis of subclinical endometritis. The climate data was recorded by data logger that were installed in the lying areas of the cows, and we did 30 minutes interval measurements. And then with these temperature and humidity values, we calculated the THI. So here I would like to give you a short impression of our climatic conditions there in the barn in Slovakia. And here we can clearly see that the threshold value of 68 was exceeded during the summer period. And now it was the question how we really can assess the THI, and this means we were interested in the accumulated heat stress a cow experienced over a time. And this is not so easy to assess, so here I show you an example for 1 day, where we can see the half-hourly measurements of the THI, and here the threshold of 68 is also indicated. And now to calculate the accumulated heat stress, we decided for the so-called Riemann sum, which is the approximated area under the curve. So, and now to analyze the effect of heat stress on the respective diseases, we considered the heat stress levels from calving until the event, which was for the puerperal metritis and subclinical ketosis day 5. And for clinical endometritis and subclinical endometritis and BCS loss, we considered the THI levels between calving and day 31. Now I come already to the results. So here I firstly present you the prevalences of the diseases on this farm. So subclinical ketosis was found in 13% of the animals. Puerperal metritis was diagnosed in 5.6% of the animals. 25% of the cows had clinical endometritis and 15% subclinical endometritis. And approximately 11% had a BCS loss greater than 1. So now I show you the results of a logistic regression analysis where we wanted to find the associations between heat stress and the respective diseases, and we could see that heat stress significantly affected the occurrence of ketosis with an odds ratio of 1.8, and animals with heat stress had also a greater risk of developing puerperal metritis. In addition, heat stress had a significant effect on the BCS loss after calving. However, heat stress was not related to the occurrence of clinical or subclinical endometritis. So during our study, we also found some already known interrelationships between different diseases. So this is nothing new, but just to show you quickly that subclinical ketosis increased the risk of puerperal metritis and on clinical and subclinical endometritis, and the puerperal metritis increased the risk for body condition score more than 1 BCS point, and also on the diagnosis of clinical and subclinical endometritis. So now I would like to conclude my presentation. So our results clearly show that moderate heat stress, as we can find it in Central Europe, has a significant effect on animal health. And this clearly illustrates the importance of heat stress monitoring on dairy farms, because many farmers are not aware of the problem today. And on the other hand, it also emphasizes the need for preventive measures, which is also not so easy. For example, in smaller farms in Austria, we have small barns, and we are limited in the reconstructions of the facilities. Okay, with this I come to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for the attention. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, we have time for some questions. No questions? Is there not a question? No, then we will, there.
Hi. We are from Venezuela, tropical. Why in these countries, you don't cross the cows with bulls, Giro, Girolando, Bosindicus. Why don't you do that? Cross the cows with these bulls?
I think it's kind of tradition, Even in Austria, for example, we have Simmental cows, and this is purely historically, I would say. We have dual purpose breeds where the calves are also cost some money. Also the male calves, the farmers can sell them, and which is a good system. And in the rest of Central Europe, the Holstein cows are also, it depends always on the milk yield. If they suffer severely from heat stress, this is not only a question of breed, but maybe I can give you the question back. Why do you think we should use the other breeds, or what do you think for the milk yield don't you think it affects the milk yield too severely if we use other breeds? I mean, this is, I think, the reason.
Thank you.
We still have some time for questions. Is there any other question? Yes. There's a microphone.
Hi, very nice talk. Did you detect any changes in milk yield, feed intake, compared to periods with no heat stress?
We have the data, and in future we want to analyze them, and I'm happy to show it in the next WBC.
Next one?
Yes.
Right.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? No? Okay, we thank Dr. Wagener. We are a little ahead of time, about 3 minutes. We will have to make a short 3-minute break so that if there is other people coming to hear the next talk to be ready. So we will start in 3 more minutes. And for that, the next one will be the talk by Catarina Anastácio. Is she here? So we have to wait. Oh, yeah, okay. So just wait 3 minutes to keep on schedule. Let me give you the... We have to wait because if somebody wants to hear your talk and they are... Okay, sí. ¿Y qué estás, cuando, a ver, en qué estás trabajando? Pero basada en México. ¿Y es en todas las especies? Sale. Gracias. Okay. Sorry. And we are ready? Okay. Now, okay, now it's time to start. We are going to start with the talk by Dr. Catarina Anastácio. Yes.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank to the organization for this opportunity to share this work with you that is part of my PhD project. And the talk is going to be about endometrial macrophages population in establishment and persistent of subclinical endometritis of postpartum dairy cows. But first, let's talk about subclinical endometritis or cytological endometritis. It's an inflammation in the endometrium that is one of the major concerns in the dairy industry, since it can evolve to a persistent status that has a huge impact in reproductive performance. The diagnosis of this pathology is challenging since it requires time-consuming and invasive techniques like biopsy and cytology. Cytology is the preferred method between these two, and even the time points and the cutoffs are not well established. Neutrophils are used and considered to classify endometritis, but in cytological samples, it's possible to observe other immune cells like macrophages, but their role remains unclear. So, the main objectives of this study was to characterize the endometrial macrophages population, but also to understand its role in establishment of persistent endometritis. There are many types of macrophages, but the principal types are pro-inflammatory phenotype, M1, which is positive for this protein marker, CD86, and the anti-inflammatory phenotype M2, positive for CD163, that is responsible for tissue regeneration. All of macrophages present this specific protein marker CD68, and they can change their phenotype according to some pathological and also physiological conditions. About subclinical endometritis, we performed this study where we sampled 173 Holstein Friesian cows, and the samples were, we performed a cytobrush technique at 21 and 42 days postpartum, a uterine flush in previous gravidicorn at 21 days postpartum, and a uterine biopsy at 42 days postpartum. In the cytological samples, they were stained with diff quick stain to count the neutrophils, to classify the animals, and to group it according to cytology cutoff. That was 80% of neutrophils at 21 days postpartum, and 5% at 42 days postpartum. So we had three groups: an healthy control group without cytological endometritis at both time points, a group of cows that had recovered spontaneously, cows with endometritis at 21 days postpartum, but recovered at 42 days postpartum, and a third group of persistent endometritis cows, cows with endometritis at both 21 and 42 days postpartum. In the diff quick stain, we also counted macrophages with foamy morphology, and part of the cytological smears were submitted to immunocytochemistry to mark total macrophages, but also M1 and M2 phenotype. We also calculate the M1-M2 ratio also in the uterine flush obtained from the uterine flushing. The sample was centrifugated to obtain a cellular pellet where we measure the protein abundance of each phenotype. Finally, in the biopsy, we evaluate the presence of these cells in deeper layers. So here's the result of the first technique. And here's a representative panel of each group. And we can see that in healthy control group, almost we can see just epithelial cells. In recovered group, we can see neutrophils, but also some macrophages. At 42 days postpartum, almost epithelial cells. In persistent endometritis group, we can observe neutrophils at both time points and other immune cells. We count the macrophages percentage, and here's the result that were compared between groups by one ANOVA. And at 21 days postpartum, percentage of macrophages were higher in the group that of cows that had recovered spontaneously. That translates in a spontaneous recovery of uterine inflammation. At 42 days postpartum, it is possible to see that cows with persistent endometritis presented higher macrophage percentage comparing to other groups, which reflects in the delayed inflammatory response. Between this interval, 21 and 42 days postpartum, we observe a significant decrease of macrophage percentage at both healthy and recovered cows, which translates in a good uterine health. But are these macrophages observed with this diff-quick stain all the macrophages present in the cytological smears, and which phenotype is present in cytology? So, to answer this question, we performed the immunocytochemistry, and we can see that in a healthy control group, there is some labeled total macrophages, and a few of each. In recovered cows, we saw these macrophages total marked, especially the M2 phenotype. In the persistent group, we saw some cells and some M1 and few M2, okay, here just one market. And in this column, you can observe the market cells in greater amplification. The percentage of these market cells were counted, and here's the statistic. And we can see that in the recovered group, the percentage of M2 macrophages were significantly higher at 21 days postpartum comparing to other groups. Despite no difference in the M1 phenotype, the cows with persistent endometritis presented a higher ratio of pro-inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory macrophages, which translates to can be related to a persistent inflammatory status. But another question. Let's see. In 42 days postpartum, the percentage of macrophages observed in cytology was low. So the results of the phenotype are not presented here in this presentation. However, we found strong correlations between diff-quick macrophages observed and total macrophages at both time points, 21 and 42 days postpartum. Besides that, at 21 days postpartum, there was a strong correlation between M2 phenotype and the macrophages observed in diff-quick, which means that majority of the macrophages observed with diff-quick stain are M2 phenotype, like the anti-inflammatory type. Why? Because these cells present a higher cytoplasmic area comparing to the other phenotype M1, and they have a foamy morphology. But a question, is these macrophages obtained from the cytology representative of all uterine environment? To find out, here's the results of Western blot protein analysis, and we can see that in almost all animals, all samples, it's possible to observe visible bands of M1 phenotype protein. While in M2, these bands were detected in some samples. But to do the statistics, we did the normalization for the total protein presented in the uterine pellet. And here's the result. which confirms the results of the previous technique. With recovered cows presented higher abundance of M2 protein, the anti-inflammatory type, which means that this phenotype is actively involved in resolution of uterine inflammation. In persistent cows, we saw higher M1-M2 ratio, which translates that low abundance of M2 is linked to uterine disease. But these results are at 21 days postpartum. But what about 42 days postpartum? Are the macrophages present in the uterus? So, since we saw that the percentage in cytology were low, we search for these cells in deeper layers of endometrium. And we can see that in almost all groups, it's possible to find marked cells, especially in a persistent group. But to do the statistics, we count 20 fields like that, and here's the results. And we can see that cows with persistent endometritis presented not only higher abundance of total macrophages, but also higher abundance of M2 macrophages comparing to cows that have recovered, which translates to delayed but active resolution by this time. So, in conclusion, evaluation of macrophages population in uterine cytology, especially at 21 days postpartum, is an important parameter to evaluate in cytology, since it can give prognosis about the evolution of subclinical endometritis, saying if the cow is going to recover or develop persistent endometritis. And to summarize everything that was said, at 21 days postpartum, M2 phenotype is linked to resolution of endometrial inflammation, and also our M1 versus M2 ratio is linked to a persistent of inflammation. At 42 days postpartum, despite the macrophage content in endometrial cytology is low, these cells are present in deeper layers in endometrium, being in higher abundance in persistent endometritis cows. And that's the message, and thank you for your attention. I would like to thank you for your attention, and to everyone that collaborates with this work. And I'm now open to questions. Thank you.
We have several minutes for questions. Is there any question? Nothing?
Did you find any multinucleated giant cells in your study?
Some of them, but few.
Can those be considered as part of a study?
It was, it depends. Which technique are you asking? Diff-quick?
The cytology.
Yeah, the cytology. So it depends of the morphology of the cell. We count the cells that that look like the ones that presented.
Okay. And one more question about the, you called it in percentage, but when we have a slide in front of us with the cytology, is there like a number that we have, like the threshold that we can go about, okay, we see more than this number, we can consider that?
Yeah, we use that threshold, and the percentage was calculated in by counting 400 cells, and the cells that look like neutrophils were counted, and the cells that look like macrophages were counted, and the percentage was obtained in 400 cells.
Okay, well, thank you.
Another question?
Hi, I have a short question. Do you evaluate fertility problems or fertility outcome in your research?
Yes, we did collect fertility outcomes, but they are not present. They are not present in this presentation. But we are working on a paper right now.
Okay.
It's almost ready to be submitted,
Okay.
and there is data about that.
Okay, yes, it is important because in subclinical endometritis is a big trouble to diagnosis. You told that, and we can find a big number of neutrophil or macrophage cells, but some of that cause get pregnant, and for this reason, it's important always to compare the results considering fertility, considering pregnancy, and
Yes.
it's so interesting results, but it's important to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Another question? We still have 3 minutes. No? I have a question. By day 42, you may have had cows that had already ovulated and others that had not ovulated. Did you took that into consideration? Is there any difference or whatever?
Yes, there were a difference.
You still don't have information about that?
Yes, I have information about that.
Can you tell something?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. No more questions? Then we will have to wait again for 3 minutes so that we keep on time for the next talk. Okay? Thank you.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, we are ready to start now. We are now on time. Then the next talk will be by Dr. Takeshi Osawa, and he's ready to start. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it's working. All right, right. Okay, thank you. Today's talk is about the association of lochia cytokines and serum amyloid A, which is inflammatory indicator during the early postpartum period with subsequent reproductive performance in eutocia, which is normal curving, and dystocia. Of course, this is a difficult curve or difficult birth. in beef cows. So in cows, bacteria invade the uterus at calving, and over the first 2 weeks postpartum, inflammation occurs, and if normal or healthy, the uterus will regress in size, after which uterine involution and bacterial elimination is complete. Thus, the physiologic inflammation response in the early postpartum period is important for healthy uterine involution. So there is a previous report by Sheldon in Holstein that it is especially important that the inflammation that occurs during the first to second week postpartum be rapid and sufficient. So dystocia is defined as a delivery that cannot be completed on its one's own and requires assistance. Excessive traction during assistance can cause severe damage to the birth canal, and inadequate disinfection of hands and curving assistant equipment can increase the risk of bacterial infection. So it is presumed that higher levels of inflammatory cytokines are expressed, and more intense inflammation persists in the uterus of cows after dystocia or difficult birth compared to those after eutocia or normal birth. However, the dynamics of intrauterine inflammation and subsequent fertility during postpartum period in dystocia cows have not been fully clarified. So another inflammatory marker from peripheral blood is serum amyloid A, or SAA. It is known to be clinically useful and elevated with mastitis in dairy cows and positively correlated with the severity of endometritis. But the association of SAA with inflammatory cytokines in the birth canal is not clear. Thus, the objectives of our study were to determine the effect of assisted curving on the early postpartum inflammatory response by means of cytokines in the birth canal and SAA, and to determine the association between early postpartum cytokines and SAA and subsequent fertility. So we sampled 147 Japanese black cows at one breeding farm in Miyazaki Prefecture. Lochia is a vaginal discharge containing blood, mucus, and uterine tissue, and discharged by 2 weeks postpartum in healthy cows. Cytokine levels in lochia were determined as an indicator of inflammation in the birth canal. So we collected lochia and blood samples at 1 week and 2 weeks postpartum and recorded subsequent reproductive performance. The lochia samples were collected manually from the vaginal and cervical canal, and the blood sample was taken from the jugular vein. The lochia samples were homogenized, proteins were extracted, and concentrations of various cytokines were measured using a simultaneous multi-parameter analyzer. SAA concentrations were determined by latex agglutination immunoturbidimetry. We divided into 2 groups, 88 cows of eutocia group and 59 cows of dystocia group, according to whether they had assisted parturition or not. So to determine the effect of cytokine and SAA concentration on reproductive performance, we compared them in the top 1/3 group with those in the, we compared them in the top 1/3 group with those in the bottom 1/3 group. So as you can see here. So this slide shows the graphs of comparison of the cytokine dynamics from week 1 to week 2 postpartum between eutocia and dystocia groups. As you can see here, IL or interleukin-1 alpha, IL-1 beta, and IL-6 concentrations at 1 week postpartum, and IL-1 alpha, 1 beta, and tumor necrosis factor or TNF alpha concentrations at 2 weeks postpartum were significantly higher in the dystocia group than in the eutocia group. But in contrast, IL-8 concentrations at 1 and 2 weeks postpartum were significantly lower in the dystocia group. SAA concentrations tended to be higher in the dystocia group at 1 week postpartum and were significantly higher in the dystocia group at 2 weeks postpartum. But no correlation was found between SAA and the cytokines in lochia at both 1 week postpartum and 2 weeks postpartum. There was no correlation. So the next is a relationship between cytokines levels and reproductive performance. This table shows only parameters that had significant differences between top 1/3 and bottom 1/3 of cytokine levels. For the IL-10 concentration at 1 week postpartum in the dystocia group, the number of days open was significantly greater in the top 1/3 of the dystocia group. For IL-1 alpha and IL-8 concentrations at 2 weeks postpartum, the number of days of first insemination was significantly greater in the top 1/3. And for IL-6 concentrations, the number of inseminations required for conception was significantly greater in the bottom 1/3, as you can see here. Looking at the eutocia group, cows in the bottom 1/3 of the IL-10 concentrations at 2 weeks postpartum had significantly more days postpartum at first insemination compared to cows in the top 1/3. This table shows the relationship between SAA concentration and reproductive performance. The number of days postpartum at first, the first AI was significantly smaller in cows with the top 1/3 of SAA concentrations at week 1 postpartum compared with those with the bottom 1/3 of SAA. As you can see here. Okay, now discussion. The present study suggests that curving assistance may cause more birth canal inflammation as well as systemic inflammation during the first and second weeks postpartum. The comparison of reproductive performance between the top 1/3 and the bottom 1/3 of cytokine concentrations suggests that birth canal inflammation in the first and second weeks postpartum is a factor that maintains reproductive performance at a certain level, even in dystocia cows. In particular, rapid and sufficient inflammation without suppression of inflammation by the anti-inflammatory cytokine or IL-10 during the first week postpartum, and the suppression of the inflammatory cytokines IL-1 alpha and IL-8 during the second week postpartum are thought to be responsible for the good reproductive performance afterwards. However, the fact that the reproductive performance was better when the concentrations of IL-6 and inflammatory cytokine was higher at 2 weeks postpartum is inconsistent with the dynamics of the other inflammatory cytokines, and it is possible that a delayed decline in IL-6 may be favorable for normal uterine involution. Anyway, further research is needed. As for SAA, the top 1/3 of SAA concentrations in the first week postpartum showed good reproductive performance. However, in the present study, there was no correlation between SAA and cytokines in lochia, suggesting that inflammation in tissues other than the vagina, such as the uterus, during the first week postpartum, which raises the level of SAA, may be responsible for the importance of subsequent fertility. So the present study did not confirm the validity of SAA as a marker of birth canal information, as no significant correlation was found between SAA concentrations and cytokines in lochia samples. The reason for the lack of correlation may be that none of the cows in the study had severe birth canal injury, and thus birth canal inflammation was not strong enough to elevate SAA. It is assumed that more severe birth canal inflammation would reflect an increase in SAA. Further studies should examine the usefulness of lochia as a marker of birth canal inflammation and the usefulness of SAA as a marker of inflammation of the reproductive organs, including the uterus. So in conclusion, low IL-10 at 1 week postpartum and low IL-1 alpha, IL-8, high IL-6 at 2 weeks postpartum may be predictive markers of subsequent high fertility. And furthermore, these findings in turn could be applied to early detection and early treatment of potential subfertile cows. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Gracias.
Thank you, Dr. Osawa. We have time for questions. No questions?
Thank you very much for your nice talk. I'm just wondering, basically in your experiments, most studies you are using lochia samples to check the concentration of cytokines as well as the serum amyloid A. But I'm just wondering how much correlation you have seen between concentration of cytokines between lochia and cervical or uterus tissues secreted.
Oh yes, that's a very good point because the concentration, the determination of the level of concentration of cytokines depending on the volume of protein and the volume of fluid itself. So we just we have to evaluate based on the same unit of protein. So that's why we extracted protein. We measured the protein levels and we determined the level of cytokine concentrations based on each protein unit.
Yeah, I think that some cytokines should be secreted into the tissue, like connective tissues, which contain lots of leukocytes, lymphocytes, etc., not in the luminal side, like in the lochias. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for your decision, comment. Yeah, at the present study, there was no correlation between the SAA and inflammatory cytokines, but SAA is a very sensitive indicator. So in the very severe dystocia, it may be reflected to the elevated SAA. I think so. We need more samples for very bad situation in the calving situation. So we need to collect animals with had bad dystocia. So, okay.
Okay. My question is the next. What is the first cause of dystocia in Japan? Is cow or is calf? What is the cause?
Okay, yeah. It varies, but particularly in my talk today was Japanese black cows or Wagyu, which is a bit smaller than the Holstein, but the problem is from the producer point of view, they need to big calves. So they use the semen from the sire that have big calves. So the excessive fetal size is one of the main issues for dystocia.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Is there another question? Okay, let's see how we are on time. We still have about 5 minutes, and if there are no questions, we will have to make a break again. I have a question for those of us that we are not experts on these molecules. You said there was one that behaved opposite to the others. The interleucin 6, I think, was opposite to the others. And you suggested that it may have some effects. Is there a physiological reason, or how do you, from what you know about these interleukins and their role, how can you explain that? Is there a possible explanation for the behavior of that particular?
Yeah. Among those various different cytokines, inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So most of them are inflammatory. So except IL-10, which is anti-inflammatory. But from the several research works, what our research group done is IL-8 is a very promising cytokine which may be applicated in the field. So our group are looking for industry or company to make rapid diagnostic test on cow side or in the field, so that the veterinarians or bovine practitioner can check the level of IL-8 in just before the calving or after the calving for 1 week or 2 postpartum period. Then they may predict this cow will have a difficult birth or dystocia, or in the postpartum period they will develop subclinical or clinical endometritis. So that's what we are looking for. I mean, as a next step. Yeah, to be more practical. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
We will wait again 3 minutes for the next talk. Okay. Okay, we can prepare for the next talk. The next talk will be delivered by Metin Tekin from Australia. You can start.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. First of all, I would like to thank you to organizing committee for giving me the chance to present our data. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that has gained a significant relevance in the face of global warming. So let's get started. I will start with some definitions and background information and move on with the study. So what is stress? Actually, stress has several definitions, etiologies, and consequences, but that are not necessarily the same to all stressors and to all animals. However, stress would be defined as the failure of an animal to deal with its environment. So what are common stressors in our daily environments? So we are talking about weather extremes, management practices, and health issues. So talking about environmental factors, mainly climatic environmental factors, like heat stress, affects the animals. So heat stress has some physiological impacts, such as decreased feed intake, reduced milk yield, and respiratory distress. And heat stress also has some behavioral signs, such as excessive panting, restlessness, and seeking shade. So I'm moving to some background information. As we all know, the dairy industry is significantly affected by heat stress. And heat stress is known reducing fertility and milk yield. For example, heat stress decreases conception rate further below 35%. In this example, control group, non-heat stress animals had 52% conception rate, while 31% conception rate in heat stress group. So heat stress also reduces milk yield. This reduction would be around 2.4 kg per cow per day. So this decrease contributes to economic losses, and the losses would be around 6.6 of monthly income of the farms. So the difference in high and low heat season financially damaging for dairy industry. Now moving to our objective. The objective of our study was to evaluate the impact of accumulated heat stress at various intervals around artificial insemination on the subsequent reproductive performance of dairy cows. So moving to materials and methods. The study was conducted on a commercial dairy farm where nearly 2,400 animals were kept. And the study enrolled 1,825 animals over a 2-year period of time. I just want to highlight that we had the same study population with my colleague that presented a short while ago. So moving further, this graph represents timeline of our study design. The study was conducted over a period starting from calving at day 0, and between days 28 and 34, a gynecological examination, including transrectal examination, was performed. And reproductive management of the study, mainly based on heat detection, OOC protocol, and artificial insemination. And cows, after voluntary waiting period of 50 days, detected in heathrows were bred by artificial insemination during this time period. However, cows not detected in heathrows by day 70 postpartum, they were subject to OOC protocol with timed artificial insemination. And pregnancy checks were done afterwards. And of course, climate data was collected over the study periods. So, moving to next. Our study mainly focused on several key reproductive aspects, such as the odds for conception at first AI, and odds for conception for all services ranging from 1 to 6, and the hazard of pregnancy by day 100 postpartum. So moving to climate data collection. As I said, during the study period, climate data, ambient temperature, and relative humidity were recorded every 30 minutes using data loggers. Loggers were located in the barns. And coming to our hero today, temperature humidity index, THI is a metric that helps us to assess and manage heat stress. So in this study, THI was calculated using the formula. In the next 2 slides, I will give you some information about THI, but I'm not going into detail as my colleague already mentioned this part. A comfort threshold of 68 for THI was used in the study, which is also accepted in cattle. And this graph shows a seasonal pattern. THI values increasing during the summer months and decreasing winter months. So it is obvious that cows were exposed to heat stress during summer periods. If we have a close look, we have this graph here. I just want to highlight that indicated numbers show approximated amount of heat stress, which is key number for our calculations. So let's have a look at accumulated heat stress level. As I said, using THI values, we calculated accumulated heat stress level. And we divided into time frames because we wanted to define which time period especially important for heat stress and for fertility. So we divided, first of all, before and after artificial insemination. Then we focused on 42 days periods, then 21 days, and 7 days. So those bars show accumulated heat stress level during these time periods. We used those accumulated heat stress levels for our analysis. So let's come to crucial part, which is the results. Our results start with the conception rate, as it's an important indicator in the fertility of dairy cows. And the first service conception rate was 41% in our study. If we have a look at the effect of heat stress, we didn't find any effect of heat stress on the odds for conception at first artificial insemination. However, our further analysis revealed that heat stress had an effect on odds for conception for all services from 1 to 6. And especially for 2 different time periods, cows exposed to heat stress during 42 days after artificial insemination had lower odds for conception when compared to the cows exposed to heat stress during 42 days before artificial insemination. And moreover, cows were less likely to get pregnant when they exposed to heat stress 1 week before artificial insemination, when we compared the cows exposed to heat stress the other weeks before artificial insemination. So it indicates that increasing as THI increase, odds for conception rate decreases. So when we turn our attention to another aspect, we have found another story. So heat stress also affected the hazard of pregnancy by day 100 postpartum. So accumulated heat stress level during 21-day period before artificial insemination negatively affected the hazard of pregnancy by day 100 postpartum. In here, hazard refers for a cow to getting pregnant. So cows exposed to heat stress during 21 days before had around 18% less chance than becoming pregnant than the other cows. So to sum up, our study found mixed findings. Heat stress had no effect on the odds for conception at first AI. However, heat stress was associated with lower odds for conception for all services, and heat stress negatively affected the hazard of pregnancy by day 100 postpartum. So to sum up, our study revealed that heat stress has a significant effect on the fertility of dairy animals, particularly around the time of artificial insemination. And looking ahead, in future, we further plan to study effect of heat stress on the gene expression of the corpus luteum, interferon-stimulated genes, and embryonic development. With this one, I finalize my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Tekin. We have several minutes for questions. Is there any question? Yes.
I didn't for follicular development.
Okay, so very clear presentation, thank you. My question is, have you looked at the ovulation rate or scanned the cows for follicogenesis, whether they were affected by the heat stress or not?
To be honest, in this study, we didn't evaluate that. We have done an ultrasound examination, but this was mainly used for the disease diagnosis for especially endometritis. So the answer is no, we didn't evaluate follicular development. But we also have done another study. We haven't finished analyzing yet, and we followed up the follicular development and luteal development under heat stress conditions. And I hope to share the results with you soon.
Thank you.
Is there another question?
There are any difference for number parts birds?
Difference for?
For number the parts. The birds, the parts.
Number of Calvins.
No.
Any difference for primary?
No, we just use multiparous cows. So we didn't have like heifers. We had just cows.
And no different. No different for number parts. Okay.
No parity difference. If you mean these one, no.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Can I ask you what kind of strategy did you use to get the cows pregnant? Any type of synchronization protocol? And did you have any time, specific time, to perform insemination? Was it in the morning at 6 a.m. or it's independent on the hour of the day?
For this, we mainly based on the herd management in this farm as the commercial farm. Yes, we used standard ovulation protocol with fixed time artificial insemination, and inseminations were done in the morning.
In the morning. When you talk about the last week that the cow was under heat stress, and that's what influenced more the cow, you are talking about the average of the 7 days, or how did you calculate this?
As I said, not as an average. For every 30 minutes measurement, we calculate the number like in this. So we use these accumulated numbers. So we had at the end like sum of the numbers, and we use this accumulated heat stress for the analysis. So the cows were under heat stress all the time. Even if they had heat stress just for 30 minutes, they were included in the analysis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any other question?
Okay. So did you have any control? You see, how is the changes in the temperature affecting the pregnancy? So you have other season before heat stress and after heat stress. Did you have, what was the record of that farm?
We sampled the cows all over the year, winter and summer. But as we just focused on heat stress and the level, we just used those animals. And it also means that if a cow had heat stress, let's say in September, she was also included in the analysis as heat stress. So we had winter group, summer group, but as we sampled all over the year, and we just included the ones with heat stress. because we just defined to several level of heat stress.
Okay, because when we say it is reduced, will you compare to what? That is the main question.
Comparing the level of heat stress they are exposed. As this calculation, if the heat stress is severe, we see the obvious results. So if it's not that severe, like moderate or low heat stress, it is not that effective for those time periods.
So it depends on the humidity temperature index.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, my question is, you have the evaluated component genetic in the population of affect the heat stress? No. No? It's very important in the new development or new population, the cattle tropical adapted in the condition is included in the population of mitigating the heat stress, okay? It's very important. The hair cure, the hand, the short hairs is very important, okay?
Yeah. For this one, actually, that's why we are focusing on heat stress. Like 20 years ago, there was no problem, especially in Central Europe. But nowadays, it's becoming a main problem. Maybe in future, actually nowadays some farms and companies working on it, they'll more focus on that. But that's why we are also doing research on it. At the moment, no. But I'm sure that in future, there will be some adaptations.
This is the future problems. Is the future more?
Yeah, that's why people are working on it, because nowadays it's becoming a problem. We have like not all the time heat stress, but we have like heat waves. Some days, some weeks, high humidity and high temperature, but then not heat stress. But I assume with this global warming, with global boiling, soon we'll have this problem.
Yes.
Question. In this part of the world, we usually don't think in Europe as a very hot place, but it is becoming every time more. Can you give us an idea of how many days are the conditions in Vienna, how many days a year lead to heat stress, for example, and how much they have increased the number of days with heat stress for the cows?
We also have recordings from our research farm. Recently it increased like 2 or 3 weeks per season, because as I said, we have like heat waves coming and extending the season. And also, for example, this year, we also had like heat wave even before coming here. So normally it's unusual, but it's extending like 2 or 3 weeks per season.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we can thank Dr. Turkin.
Thank you.
And now we call the last talk of the day and of the Congress. It will be Dr. Juan Hernández Medrano.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. I know it's the last one, so yeah, just hang on. It's another 20 minutes, and you are free, I guess. So thank you very much. So this is going to be a bit of a change in gear or change in focus. So we've been talking a lot about the cows themselves, right? So how different the stressors, and particularly would like to thank the previous speaker of talking about this, because I will be focusing again on the stress. But instead of focusing on the cows or even the calves when they are born, we will be looking into what happens when these animals are still in utero. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we know, and I think Dr. Turkin mentioned this a lot about the stress, and we know animals are usually subjected to different types of stressors. Probably some of the most common ones are nutritional stressors or diet stress. Yeah. So, and some of the others are environmental stress, and I think we have had very good examples this morning about this, right? So we talk about heat stress, but also remember in places that are not particularly hot is also the other extreme, right? Cold stress, you can have the same effect. So those stressors, diet, and even exposure to some endocrine disrupting agents can alter fetal development in utero. So we know a lot of these stressors affect cow's productive status, right? But what happens to those animals that are still in utero, that are still developing? So we know, and there is a lot of research done now that is being published, that whatever you do to the cow when she's pregnant, usually you get an effect directly on the fetus, and you can affect growth and the actual development of the animal. You can affect the immune response of those animals that will be born to those cows, and also you will be affecting a particularly aspect that I'm interested, which is reproduction. And I just mentioned here the ovarian reserve and AMH, we will talk a bit about later in a bit. So why is this happening, or why this is possible? Well, as all of you know, the formation of the animal, all the formation of the tissues, particularly placenta, and all the organs that will eventually become an individual are formed during very early stages of pregnancy, particularly during mid-pregnancy, early pregnancy, probably first trimester, half second trimester, most of the organs are formed at this point, right? So whatever you do at this time, whatever management you do to those cows that are pregnant at this particular point could have a long-term effect on the animals. And particularly, for example, in this case, talking about the ovary. So ovaries are usually differentiated around day 30, 35 of pregnancy in cattle, and then you are able to see the actual ovary developed, or the differentiated ovary, at day 60. At that point, the ovary is already organizing to form what we call the primordial follicles. And the primordial follicles is the reserve, the ovarian reserve, the actual ovarian reserve of these animals, meaning these follicles, the number of these follicles are established during pregnancy. And cows, or every other mammal pretty much, is born with a limited number of these follicles. And these are the only ones that the animals will be able to recruit and ovulate later on in life, during their adult life. So whatever happens at this point, it can have a long-term effect on the reproductive performance of these animals. So we've been looking into working with this hormone, the Anti-Müllerian hormone, which is usually used as marker of fertility. And I think Dr. Pietro Baruselli yesterday mentioned a lot about it and explained how AMH is linked to, or is quite good at predicting the number of growing follicles that you have in an ovary, right? So this particular hormone is produced in the granulosa cells, specifically of growing follicles. And then these concentrations of AMH disappear or decrease when the follicles start getting into mid-size, preovulatory size of follicles. So it's kind of, let's say, inverse relationship with the steroidogenical capacity of those granulosa cells. So that's pretty much how we see it. The important bit about AMH, and something that is being used and why it is used as a marker of fertility, is because it doesn't really vary within the animal. So regardless of the stage of estrus cycle, usually AMH seems to remain stable in those animals, in those adult animals. However, there is a huge variation between animals, or there could be a huge variation between animals. So you have animals that have high AMH, animals that have intermediate, which eventually will be most of them, and then you have animals that have low AMH. So this particular, when you divide the animals in these groups of high, medium, low, it's been observed that low AMH animals tend to have more subfertility or more problems with fertility. So that's why it's been suggested that this one is a marker of fertility, right? So also, other important thing to consider about AMH is that AMH is not the same, and it's not always, the concentrations are not always the same. So usually, and when animals are young, when calves are young, concentrations of AMH are quite high. And then they stabilize around puberty, and then they remain stable throughout the reproductive life, to then decrease with age, which is similar to what happens in most species that we have studied. The other interesting bit about AMH is that it is linked to this word stageability. So high AMH, cows with high AMH concentrations in serum or in plasma tend to remain longer in the herd, which is something that we really like, particularly for beef cattle, which is the focus of the research that I've been doing. Okay, I've mentioned what happens when you intervene or when you have any stressor during pregnancy. So now, for this particular study, we use this stressor, the weaning really as an stressor. So we know that weaning causes an stress in the cows and in the calves, right? So we've been focusing for a long time on what happens to the calf itself, how the calf becomes productive or less productive, how it grows or how it doesn't grow. But pretty much defining different types of weaning. So we have seen, or the most common kind of weaning strategies that we have is the abrupt weaning, right? So animals, in abrupt weaning, animals are completely separated from the cow on a particular day, and they never see each other again. So this causes a lot of stress on the calf, we know that, and it also causes stress on the cows. There are two other strategies which are low or medium stress, if you want to talk, mention and say that. It's one that is a two-stage weaning, which is the nose flap. When you can see you can see a figure here. This is going, yeah. So you can see a calf with a nose flap. So that's one way of doing weaning, and the other one fence line weaning. And the principle of this is just separating the cow from the calf, so the calf cannot nurse, but the calf still has the stimulus, the visual, the auditory, and the olfactory stimulus from the cow. So in a way, it should be less stressful. So that's why we consider those less stressful situations. However, as I mentioned, most of the research has been done about what happened to the calf and how the calf performs after weaning, but we don't really know what happens to the cow. I know concentrations, or we know in general that concentrations of cortisol in the cow and the fetus are fairly similar throughout the pregnancy. So they are a reflection of each other. But exactly what happens to that fetus following the weaning of its sibling, really, or half sibling, we don't really know. So this is the purpose of the study that we did. This is part of a larger study that was done in the University of Calgary, in the W ranches. And in this one, we particularly focus on AMH concentrations and in weaning weights in heifer calves that were subjected to, whose mother, and this is interesting, so heifer calves whose mothers were subjected to the different types of different methods of weaning in the previous season, let's say. So let's see if this is a bit clearer with the diagram. So we had, as I said, we were part of a larger project of weaning that that project was studying the three different methods that I mentioned: the abrupt weaning, nose flap, abrupt weaning, AW, nose flap, which is that two-stage weaning, or fence line weaning. So in this study, they were looking at what happens to the cows and what happens to the calves. So what I did, or what we did for this particular study, is we collected some saliva cortisol from the cows and the calves from the day prior to up to 3 days following weaning. Weaning, in this particular, to facilitate management in the ranch, it was staggered, so not all the groups were weaned at the same time, and this is going to be important later on. So for this particular study, I will be only focusing on the fetuses that were, on the animals that were in the uterus at the time of weaning. So those animals, we were only focusing on the female calves that were born in the spring of 2023, which are kind of the daughters of the animals that were weaned on fall of 2022. I hope this is kind of clear. So at this point, we collected blood samples from these animals at 2 different time points. One at processing, which is when animals are vaccinated before they are turned out, the pairs are turned out to pasture in late spring, and then at weaning, once the breeding season has been completed and the cow calves are brought back for the weaning strategies. Okay, so we collected the blood sample from these animals and also collected weaning weight. We utilize a commercial AMH kit, which has been validated for using cattle by many, many groups. And then we did some of the statistical analysis on those, of course. So it's a very simple design, I think. So remember what I mentioned, that there had been a bit of, the animals were staggered during weaning. So this makes this difference. So animals in the abrupt weaning, because that was the first group that was weaned, they were younger, of fetal younger. So those fetus that were in uterus at that time, they were younger than the other two groups. So in fact, this had about 100 days of age, or fetal age. And the other two groups had about 150 days of age. However, they are all within that mid-pregnancy, second trimester stage. So this was the difference in terms of the fetal age. The other interesting bit that we saw is maternal cortisol. As I remember, this is salivary cortisol. So we saw that the concentration of cortisol the day prior to weaning were higher in all groups. And this has been reported previously, that usually animals, when you are managing animals for weaning purposes, one of the first increases in cortisol happened during the actual management of movement of animals. So, but then, as we saw in this study, cortisol concentrations went down on the day, or a baseline, if you want to call it, to the day of weaning, to then increase again, but then come back down again. So in general, all groups had a similar pattern. However, one interesting bit is that those animals that were weaned, or the cow-calf pairs that were weaned using the nose flap system, had higher concentrations of cortisol compared to the other two groups, which was an interesting finding. We were expecting the abrupt weaning to be more stressful for cows, but apparently nose flap seems to be more stressful for the cow than what it seems to happen to the calf. So in terms of AMH concentration, what we observed was that AMH concentrations in general were lower in the nose flap groups at either at 2 or at 5 months of age. So there was no difference in terms of age in AMH concentrations. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, AMH concentration in animals, in prepubertal animals, tend to be quite high. So these animals have high concentrations of AMH, but in general, the animals in the nose flap, or in the two-stage weaned calves, had lower concentrations than in the other groups. And again, when I mentioned concentrations were higher, tend to be higher, or tend to be more variable, let's say, in animals that were 2 months old than when they were 5 months old. So it seems like AMH stabilizes getting closer to puberty, and then it remains stable until it goes down. So it's this kind of interesting observation on AMH. Another interesting finding was that the weaning, so animals that were born to cows showing higher concentrations of cortisol at the time of weaning tend to be heavier than those animals or than those calves that were weaning following the other two protocols. Again, this was something that we were not expecting. We were expecting the abrupt weaning group to be more stressful and therefore causing these problems. This is not something new. We know that animals that are subjected to stressors during the second part of pregnancy, second or third trimester, can show increase in body weight, in live birth weight, or in pretty much birth weight when they are at calving. So this is something that we were kind of expecting, but instead of the nose flap, we were expecting the abrupt weaning to have that increase. Okay, so in general, in conclusion, what we concluded from this study, and remember this is still a small study that was run kind of in parallel with another study. So the numbers, if you remember, the numbers of heifer calves that we use are relatively low. So we will like to repeat this one to try to increase the power on this, pretty much of the analysis. So in conclusion, the thing that we observed was the animals whose mothers had higher concentrations of cortisol at the time of weaning seem to have lower concentrations of AMH. So if that is impacting ovarian development, we don't really know. We will need to observe the ovaries or try to do histology on those ovaries, but at least from an AMH point of view, and I know that has some issues with AMH as a marker of fertility, but from an AMH point of view, these animals seem to be having lower AMH. And the other interesting bit is that animals whose mothers had higher concentrations of cortisol or were stressed at the time of weaning tend to be heavier at weaning. And we expect these animals also to be heavier at birth. However, we were not able to collect weaning birth weights. So kind of a take-home message for all of you, hopefully, and I said we were looking into the fetus rather than the actual cow or the calf on the ground. So one of the things that I kind of take-home message, as I said, is that maternal weaning stress can have a long-term impact on many of the parameters of those calves that are still growing in utero. So in this case, we look at potential fertility impacts and potential growth impacts. But just keep in mind that these are two of the parameters that we measured, but I'm sure there are others that will be similarly affected. So with this, I just want to acknowledge Brian Birkenhagen, who was the DBM student that ran a lot of these analyses. So he's the one that did all the AMH analysis, and it was really, really good in the lab. So. And also the WA ranches, the University of Calgary ranches, and the staff, particularly Heidi Bennett, because without her it wouldn't have been possible. She was instrumental for this, and of course the UCBM for their funding. And thank you very much. I can take any questions.
Is there any question?
Did you do fetus sexing or something like that to differentiate between the MAH levels? If the fetus was a female or male?
Well, in this one, we only used the heifer calves that were born to those calves. So we didn't do, at the time of pregnant diagnosis, we didn't do sexing, but we just waited for the animals to calve, and then we only use the heifer calves. But in previous experiments, we've done that, and we have been able to separate males and females at the time of pregnancy and to follow concentration. So that could be the next set of experiments. We want to do that, try to control numbers, of course, and then control sex of the fetuses in order to reduce variability due to sex.
Dr. Baruselli mentioned yesterday that it was more related with follicle growing than with fertility. Do you agree with that?
That's a kind of an interesting bit. Yeah, in fact, AMH is a marker of growing follicles. So AMH is only produced in those follicles that could be recruitable under superovulation or on any hormonal treatment. So that's for sure that is linked to the number rather than the quality. But in the studies that the group in Ireland has been doing over the past few decades, they found that if you separate the animals in very high or in high AMH and low AMH, there seem to be the high AMH cows seem to be more fertile or show less fertility problems, whether is that associated to the number of follicles that are growing in every wave, or is associated to something else. AMH cannot tell you that, but at least in terms of fertility, the association, there seems to be some association of those animals, and particularly the longevity part, which is, I think, important for producers, having animals for long periods of time. Yeah.
Okay, we have finished with this presentation. We are going to have the closing ceremony in 30 minutes. It's in one of these rooms in Grand Cancun 3, but we have to get out because they are going to move all these things. There will be some wine. If you go out and then to the right, there will be some wine for this 30 minutes of waiting.